Building on the wealth of the family lumbering fortunes, Edward Hersey built an elegant mansion on the corner of Pine and 6th Street in 1879, but sold it in early 1881. Then, 2 years later, in the spring of 1883, he purchased land just across the street to erect, as a newspaper said, a comfortable cottage on the grounds. The Herseys appear to have spent only part of each year in this home, traveling throughout Europe and the United States, and maintaining a residence in the Cathedral Hill area of St. Paul. This home was designed by William H. Willcox, an architect who had recently moved from Chicago to St. Paul. He quickly gained a reputation for his designs. Examples of his work include a St. Paul row house that F. Scott Fitzgerald called home, and the First Presbyterian Church here in Stillwater. In his book, Hints to Those Who Propose to Build, written a year after this house was built, Willcox wrote,
"Every man's house is a sort of effigy of himself. It reveals his own character. It proclaims his taste and manners, or the want of them. It should be cheerful and devoid of unmeaning and riotous ornamentation in metal and jigsaw carving. Nothing false or useless. Everything true, simple, and useful."
Willcox's work here fits the contemporary description of it as a comfortable cottage. For this house, he avoided what he called the worst vagaries of the Queen Anne fashion, which has contorted so many buildings. A newspaper reporter said it was just a plain 2-story frame house, red and green, and with some ladies out on the porch. Its look suggests the new shingle style that was especially popular in New England at the time. The style blended together elements of the stick, the Queen Anne, and colonial revival. The term shingle style didn't come into use until 3/4 of a century later, but architects of that era employed the same basic principles, emphasizing horizontal lines rather than the dramatic vertical thrust seen in something like the Bean Mansion across the street. Other characteristics include the wood shingle siding, irregular roof lines that create a sense of depth, and cross gables and eaves on several levels. In 1891, Edward and Mary Hersey's marriage ended in a divorce, and Mary soon wed another wealthy lumberman, Charles Nelson. The empty home was purchased by one of Edward's business associates, George Atwood. Atwood had arrived in Stillwater in 1884 to work for the Hersey Bean and Brown Lumber Company, and quickly took a prominent role in its management. 7 years later, about the same time that he moved into this house, Atwood went into business for himself, leasing the A mill from Hersey and Bean. Within a few years, he transformed the industry when he brought logs to the mill by rail instead of by river. One of the St. Croix Valley's last great lumbermen, Atwood continued to expand his empire in the early years of the 20th century. If a home reveals the character of its owner, as William Willcox argued, then we can know a great deal about George Atwood because of his magnificent gymnasium. The Atwoods erected this gymnasium on the property in the 1890s, said to have housed every mechanical device known to athletics, as well as a bowling alley and an observatory. The space included a museum and taxidermy workshop. In 1909, a National Gymnastics magazine described it.
"The most pretentious, most beautiful recreation house in the world is buried away in the hamlet of Stillwater, Minnesota. The finest gymnasium, barring none on either hemisphere, has been erected here by George Atwood, the great Northwestern lumber king. Those fortunate enough to have gained admission to this palace have gone away wild with enthusiasm for what they saw, while Stillwater residents simply tap their foreheads at Atwood's folly."
Following George's death in 1938, his amazing collection was sold, and his widow tore down the gymnasium. Fortunately for us, Atwood's home stands as a reminder of the era of the great lumberman of Stillwater.